I never thought a whisper could feel like a gunshot, but that's exactly how it felt at 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The room was deathly silent, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum against your ribs. The moonlight was slicing through the gap in our heavy curtains, casting a cold silver blade across the bed we'd shared for 7 years. Beside me, my wife, the woman I had built my entire existence around, shifted slightly. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, and then in a voice so clear it felt like she was standing right next to my ear, she let it out. "Don't, Jack. It's too big. I can't handle it." The words didn't just hang in the air. They poisoned it. I felt the oxygen leave the room. My body went completely rigid, every muscle locking into place, as if I were trying to survive a physical impact. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance, waiting for her to say more, or maybe God. I hoped for me to realize I had hallucinated the whole thing. But the silence that followed was even worse. It was a heavy, guilty silence that confirmed everything I had been too blind to see for months. Before I go any further into the nightmare that followed, I need to ask, have any of you ever felt that sudden, sickening realization that your life is a lie, that the person sleeping next to you is a complete stranger? Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to trust your gut when it felt like your heart was breaking. I'm sharing this because I need you to know that sometimes the most brutal ending is actually the only way to start a real life. If this story hits home, please subscribe. I'm just trying to make sense of the wreckage here. I lay there for what felt like hours, but the clock only ticked forward 5 minutes. My mind was a chaotic library, flipping through every memory of the last year. Every late night at the office, every girl's night where she came home smelling like a cologne I didn't own every time she had pulled away when I tried to hold her. It all clicked. The puzzle was finished and the picture was hideous. I wasn't angry yet. I was cold. A deep, subterranean chill had settled into my marrow. I realized then that the woman next to me wasn't my wife anymore. She was just a person who had been using my home as a base camp for her betrayals. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The harsh yellow light exploded into the room, revealing the sweat on her forehead and the peaceful expression on her face, the face of a woman who was dreaming of another man while lying in my bed. "Wake up," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was flat, mechanical, stripped of all the warmth I usually reserved for her. She stirred, blinking against the light, her hand instinctively reaching for me. "Honey, what's wrong? Is it the dog?" "Get up, Sarah," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed, not looking at her. "Get up and start packing." She sat up, rubbing her eyes, her confusion appearing so genuine it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. "Packing? What are you talking about? It's 3 a.m. Are you having a panic attack?" I finally turned to look at her. I saw the gold wedding band on her finger, the one I had worked 3 jobs to buy when we were 23. It looked like a shackle. "I heard you, Sarah. I heard everything. Jack must be a very impressive man if he's keeping you up at night even when you're asleep." The color drained from her face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of her soul. The confused wife mask shattered, leaving behind something jagged and ugly. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask, "Who's Jack?" That was all the confirmation I needed. She just sat there, her mouth slightly open, the air between us thick with the stench of her secrets. I don't know what you're talking about. You're imagining things. She stammered, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to gaslight me. You're stressed, Owen. You're working too hard on the new project. Lay down. Let's just talk in the morning. There is no morning for us, I said, standing up. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the large suitcase we had used for our anniversary trip to Maui just 6 months ago. The irony felt like a physical weight in my hands. I threw it onto the bed. You have 10 minutes. Take what you need for tonight. I'll send the rest to your mother's house tomorrow. If you're still here in 11 minutes, I'm calling the police to report a trespasser. Owen, stop your being insane. She was crying now, but the tears felt performative. They weren't tears of regret for hurting me. They were tears of fear, because her comfortable life was evaporating. You're going to throw away 7 years because of something I said in my sleep. It's a dream. People dream crazy things. I leaned over the bed, my face inches from hers. I could smell her expensive night cream, the one I'd bought for her birthday. It wasn't just a dream, Sarah. It was a confession. And the fact that you didn't ask who Jack was told me everything I needed to know. Now pack. Or I start throwing your things out the window into the mud. I walked out of the bedroom and went into the kitchen. I needed a glass of water, but my hands were shaking so violently that the glass clinked against my teeth. I stood there in the dark, listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom, the zipper of the suitcase, the frantic rustle of clothes, the muffled sobs. It felt like I was listening to the demolition of a building, this house, this life, the future kids we'd named, the retirement we'd planned. It was all being stuffed into a nylon bag and zipped shut. I thought about the Jack she had mentioned. The name was familiar, but in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a stranger's name. It was a name that lived in the periphery of our lives. But I pushed that thought down for now. I couldn't handle the who yet. I could only handle the out. Exactly 10 minutes later, she appeared in the hallway. She looked small, disheveled, clutching a puffer jacket over her pajamas and dragging the heavy suitcase. She stopped at the end of the hall, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "You're going to regret this. You have nobody without me, Owen. You're just a guy behind a computer screen. I made this home." I walked toward her, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors we'd picked out together at Home Depot. I didn't say a word. I just opened the front door. The night air was biting a sharp contrast to the staged warmth of our living room. I stepped back, gesturing for her to leave. She hesitated on the threshold, looking out into the dark street. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Ask Jack," I said. As she stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking rhythmically against the wood, I felt a strange surge of power. It was the power of someone who had nothing left to lose. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her silhouette retreat toward her car. When she reached the driver's side door, she turned back, perhaps expecting me to brake, to beg her to stay, to tell her it was all a joke. Instead, I raised my hand. I gave her a slow, deliberate wave. "Goodbye, Jack," I called out into the night. The sound of her car door slamming was like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I watched her taillights fade into the distance until the street was empty again. I stood there for a long time, the cold air numbing my face, staring at the empty driveway where her SUV used to sit. The silence of the neighborhood felt heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back into the house and locked the door, deadbolt chain, everything. The house felt different now. The air was thinner, the shadows longer. I walked back into the bedroom, the lamp still casting its harsh light on the unmade bed. The indentation of her body was still there on the mattress. I grabbed the sheets, the expensive high-thread count linen she'd insisted on, and ripped them off the bed with a primal grunt. I dragged them into the laundry room and threw them into the trash bin, not the washer. I didn't want them cleaned. I wanted them gone. I sat down in the middle of the bare mattress, the cold air from the open window finally reaching the back of the house. My phone was on the nightstand. It buzzed. A notification from our shared calendar dinner with the Millers, 7 p.m. Friday. I deleted it. I began scrolling through our phone bill online, my eyes scanning the hundreds of texts sent to a number I didn't recognize, a number that appeared late at night during the hours I was editing videos or sleeping. My heart started to pound again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a cold, calculated hunger. I saw the pattern. I saw the frequency. I saw the betrayal laid out in digital ink. I looked at the clock. 4:12 a.m. The world was still asleep, but I had never been more awake. I walked into my office, the glow of my triple monitor setup reflecting in my eyes. I sat down in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and opened a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it simply, The End. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a backup hard drive I hadn't touched in months. It contained the security footage from the Ring camera and the hidden nanny cam we'd installed when we thought someone was stealing packages. I hadn't looked at the footage in weeks because I trusted her. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me as I clicked the first file. My mouse hovered over the play button, my finger trembling. The room was freezing, but I was sweating. I clicked play and watched the screen flicker to life, the grainy black and white image showing the front porch of my own home 3 days ago while I was out getting groceries. A man I knew stepped into the frame, and the way she opened the door for him, the way she smiled, was a version of her I hadn't seen in years. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched them disappear inside. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor washing over my face, and felt the last shred of my old self wither away. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer's private number knowing he wouldn't answer, but I didn't care. I left a message, my voice steady and dark. It's Owen. It's starting. I want everything. And I mean everything. I hung up and stared at the screen, watching the man on the video laugh as he entered my house. I grabbed a pen from my desk and began writing a list on a yellow legal pad, the ink bleeding into the paper as I pressed down with everything I had. The first name at the top of the list wasn't Sarah. It was the man in the video. I looked at the wedding photo on my desk, the two of us on a beach in Mexico, looking like the luckiest people alive. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the silver frame, and slowly turned it face down on the cold wood of the desk. The silver frame felt heavy and cold, a piece of metal that used to hold a memory, but now only held a lie. I didn't just turn it over. I slid it into the back of my desk drawer, burying it under a stack of old tax returns and half-finished scripts. The sound of the drawer clicking shut was the finality I needed. The man on the screen, the one currently walking through my front door in a loop of grainy security footage, wasn't just a ghost. He was real. He had a name, and he had been sitting at my dinner table just 2 weeks ago. Jack wasn't a stranger. He was my business partner, the man I had trusted to handle our legal contracts while I handled the creative vision of our company. Seeing his face in my house at an hour when I was miles away shifted something in my brain. It wasn't a crack, it was a hardening. I felt like a piece of iron being plunged into ice water. My focus sharpened until the only thing that existed was the blinking cursor on my computer and the digital trail of breadcrumbs they had been leaving for months. I didn't feel like a husband anymore. I felt like a forensic investigator. I stayed in that chair until the sun began to bleed through the blinds, turning the room a dusty orange. My eyes were bloodshot, but my mind was a steel trap. I spent the next several hours doing what I do best, storytelling. But this time, I wasn't writing a script for a podcast or a video. I was mapping out the narrative of their downfall. I started with the financial records. Jack had been optimizing our overhead for the last quarter or so, he told me. Now, as I looked at the redirected wire transfers and the consulting fees paid to an LLC I'd never heard of, I realized he wasn't just taking my wife, he was taking my future. Every time Sarah told me she was going to a spa weekend to find herself, the joint account showed a withdrawal that matched a luxury hotel booking in Jack's name. They weren't even being careful. They were being arrogant. They thought I was too distracted by my work, too creative and sensitive to notice the math. By noon, I had a digital folder so dense it could have sunk a ship. I had timestamps, GPS logs from our shared car app, and a series of emails Jack had mistakenly archived in a folder titled Legal Research. It was a love letter to greed and betrayal. I felt a strange, hollow sort of laughter bubbling up in my chest. They really thought I was the weak link in this chain. They thought Owen was the one who needed protection. I stepped out of my office for the first time in 12 hours. The house was a graveyard of our life together. A half-empty coffee mug Sarah had left on the counter. Her favorite candle unlit. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of the strongest, blackest coffee I could find. As the machine hissed, I looked out the window at the empty driveway. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Sarah. "Owen, please, you're scaring me. I'm at my mom's. We need to talk like adults. You can't just throw me out like trash. I have rights to that house." I stared at the screen. Rights? It was such a clinical word for a woman who had just been moaning another man's name in my ear. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Every word I sent her now was a potential weapon she could use in court, and I was done giving her ammunition. Instead, I called the locksmith. I told him it was an emergency. I told him I'd pay triple. While the locksmith was working on the front door, the metallic grinding of the drill providing a strangely satisfying soundtrack to my morning, I started the second phase of the plan. I called my lead editor. We had a project due in 3 days, a major brand deal that Jack was supposed to sign off on. "Hey, it's Owen." I said, my voice sounding steadier than it had in years. "Change of plans on the Miller contract. I need you to pull all the access codes for the shared drive. Change the passwords. Now. Don't tell Jack. He's being restructured." The confusion on the other end was palpable, but my team trusted me. They knew I was the engine of the company. Jack was just the oil, and oil is easy to replace. Once I knew the business assets were locked down, I went back into the house. The locksmith handed me a set of heavy silver keys. "All set, sir. Deadbolts, back door, and the garage. Nobody's getting in without these." I thanked him and watched his van pull away. I felt a tiny bit of the weight lift. The house was mine again. But the silence was still too loud. I went to the living room and looked at the bookshelf. Hidden behind a row of vintage film biographies was a small fireproof safe. I punched in the code "our wedding anniversary." It felt like a slap in the face. I immediately changed the code to the date of my mother's birthday. Inside were the physical deeds, the titles, and a backup drive of my most valuable IP. I took everything out and moved it to a safe deposit box at a bank downtown that Sarah didn't even know I had an account at. The afternoon was a blur of calculated movements. I felt like I was watching myself from the ceiling. I saw a man methodically erasing a woman from his existence. I packed her remaining clothes into heavy-duty trash bags, not with care, but with a cold efficiency. I didn't look at the dresses I'd complimented her on or the shoes we'd bought in Paris. They were just fabric, just objects. I stacked the bags in the garage right next to the recycling bins. As I was finishing, a black Mercedes pulled into the curb. My heart skipped a beat, then settled into a low, predatory thrum. It was Jack. He didn't even have the decency to wait until I called him. He stepped out of the car looking exactly like the man I'd seen on the security footage, polished confident wearing a suit that I had probably helped pay for. He walked up the driveway with a concerned expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Owen, man, I just heard from Sarah. What the hell is going on? She's hysterical. You can't just lose your mind and kick her out in the middle of the night." I stayed behind the screen door, the mesh creating a veil between us. I didn't open it. I just looked at him. I noticed the way he checked his watch, a Rolex I'd given him as a partnership bonus last year. The betrayal felt sharp again, like a fresh cut. "She told you that, did she?" I asked. Jack sighed, putting on his professional mediator voice. "Look, I know things have been tense. You've been under a lot of pressure with the channel. Maybe you just need a break. Let's go grab a drink, talk this out. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for whatever you think you heard." "I don't think I heard anything, Jack. I know what I heard. And I know what I saw on the Ring camera from Tuesday afternoon. The mask didn't slip immediately. He was good. He just blinked, a small muscle in his jaw twitching. Owen, you're being paranoid. I was there to drop off those contracts you forgot to sign. Sarah let me in because it was raining. Don't let your imagination ruin a good marriage and a great business." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and turned the screen toward him. I played the clip. Not the one of him entering. The one of him leaving 2 hours later, stopping to kiss her in the foyer, thinking the angle of the camera couldn't see them. The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had happened in our friendship in years. Jack's face went from pale to a dull, angry red. "That's private property, Owen. You can't use that." "I can use whatever I want in my own house, Jack, and as of 10 minutes ago, you no longer have access to the company accounts. The board, meaning me, and the silent investors will be notified of your breach of fiduciary duty by Monday morning. I'd suggest you find a very good lawyer. Not the one we usually use. He's already on my retainer." Jack stepped closer to the door, his eyes narrowing. The nice guy persona was gone, replaced by the predator I should have seen coming a mile away. "You think you're so smart. You're a content creator, Owen. You're a clown for the internet. I'm the one who handles the real world. You try to freeze me out and I'll burn your reputation to the ground before the sun sets. I know where all the bodies are buried in this business." "Then start digging," I said, my voice a whisper that carried more weight than his threats. "Because I've already started." I walked away from the door, leaving him standing on the porch, shouting threats that were getting louder and more desperate. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of that cold coffee. It tasted like ash, but I drank it anyway. I could hear him pounding on the door, then the sound of his tires screeching as he sped away. He was going to her. I knew it. They would huddle together trying to figure out how much I knew, trying to find a way to flip the script. They didn't realize I was the one holding the pen. I spent the evening in the dark watching the streetlights flicker on. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion that felt like it was coming from my bones. I realized I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I opened the fridge, but everything in it reminded me of her. The organic kale, the expensive cheese, the white wine she liked. I took the trash can and swept it all inside. Every shelf, every condiment. I wanted the fridge as empty as I felt. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the smell of discarded food and the humming of the empty refrigerator. My mind started to wander to the revenge part of this. It wasn't enough to just take the house and the business. They had tried to take my dignity. They had laughed at me in the dark. They had treated my life like a game they could win. I looked at my laptop still open on the counter. There was one more file I hadn't looked at. It was a hidden folder on Sarah's cloud drive, something I'd stumbled upon while looking for the hotel receipts. It was password protected. I tried her birthday. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I sat there for 30 minutes trying every combination of names and dates. Finally, I typed in Jack 2026. The folder opened. My heart stopped. It wasn't just photos. It wasn't just messages. It was a plan, a literal step-by-step document on how to provoke me into a mental breakdown so they could claim I was unfit to run the company. They wanted to commit me. They wanted to use my history of anxiety, the very thing Sarah had promised to help me through, as a weapon to strip me of my legal rights. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was a calculated attempt to erase my personhood. I felt a coldness settle over me that was different from anything I've ever felt. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was a war for my sanity. I looked at the document, my eyes scanning the notes Sarah had written about my erratic behavior and increasing paranoia. She had been documenting my reactions to her own gaslighting for months, preparing a case to lock me away, while she and Jack ran off with the life I'd built. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my resolve hard as diamond. I didn't feel like crying anymore. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. I walked over to the large window in the living room and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, they were together, thinking they were the protagonists of this story. They were wrong. I picked up the phone again. I didn't call the lawyer this time. I called a contact I hadn't spoken to in years, a private investigator who specialized in difficult corporate transitions. It's Owen. I need the full workup on a man named Jack. Everything. Bank accounts, hidden assets, his ex-wife's contact info, and whatever he's hiding in that consulting firm of his. I don't care about the cost. I want to see his world burn. The voice on the other end was gravelly and indifferent. That takes time, Owen, and it gets messy. I have all the time in the world, I replied, and I'm already covered in mud. I hung up and walked back to the office. The blue light of the monitors was the only thing illuminating the room. I sat down and began to work not on a video, but on a spreadsheet. I started listing every person Jack had ever stepped on to get where he was. I started looking for the cracks in his armor. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece, and I was going to do it while Sarah watched. As the clock struck midnight, I found the first real crack. A dormant offshore account tied to a project we'd done 3 years ago, a project that had failed, according to Jack, costing us nearly $500,000. Except according to these new records, the money hadn't disappeared. It had just changed lanes. It had been the seed money for Jack's private ventures. I leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I could feel the darkness of the house closing in around me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was part of it. I reached for my coffee, realizing it was stone cold, and took a long, slow sip. The bitterness didn't bother me anymore. I looked at the end folder on my desktop. I realized the title was wrong. This wasn't the end. This was the setup. I clicked on the folder and renamed it. I typed 3 words that felt like a vow. The Great Reckoning. I pulled a single cigarette out of a pack I'd hidden in the back of my desk, a habit I'd quit 5 years ago for Sarah. I lit it, the smoke curling up toward the ceiling like a ghost. I watched it dance in the light of the screen, my mind already 3 steps ahead, imagining the look on Jack's face when the first domino fell. I wasn't just going to take his money, I was going to take his name. I walked back to the window, the cigarette glowing in the dark. The city looked different now. It looked like a map. It looked like a battlefield. And I was the only one who knew where the mines were buried. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, listening to the hum of the house, the silence no longer heavy, but expectant. The night was far from over, and I had so much more to find before the sun dared to show its face again. I reached out and touched the glass my fingers, leaving a faint smudge on the reflection of my own tired, determined face. I wasn't the Owen she knew. That Owen was dead buried under a pile of lies and whispers. The man standing here now was someone she wouldn't recognize, someone she should have been terrified of. I felt the heat of the cigarette getting closer to my fingers, but I didn't move. I just watched the lights of the distant cars, wondering which one of them was carrying her, wondering if she could feel the air turning cold around her yet. I took one last drag and crushed the ember out against the windowsill, leaving a small black scar on the white wood. It was the first of many scars this house would see before this was over. I turned back to the monitors, the light reflecting in my pupils like twin stars, and hit the search button one more time. The hunt was officially on. The cursor didn't blink anymore. It seemed to pulsate, keeping time with the throbbing in my temples as the clock crawled toward 3 a.m. I stared at the dormant offshore account details until the numbers began to look like ancient runes. This was the smoking gun. Jack hadn't just been skimming off the top. He had been hollowing out the foundation of our company like a termite in a bespoke suit. I felt a strange, detached sense of awe. To pull this off, he had to have started planning the theft almost the same month he started sleeping with my wife. The sheer commitment to my destruction was almost impressive. I picked up the legal pad again, but I didn't write. I just gripped the pen so hard the plastic began to groan. If you're watching this right now, I want you to look at the people you trust most in your life. The ones who have the keys to your house, the ones who know your passwords, the ones who see you when you're most vulnerable. Are they there because they love you? Or are they there because you're a harvest? Drop a true in the comments if you've ever been betrayed by a brother. I need to see how many of us have survived the snakes. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what I did next is the part they never tell you about in those How to Forgive self-help books. I didn't want forgiveness. I wanted a total eclipse of their existence. The first step of the systematic collapse wasn't a loud confrontation. It was a silent digital assassination. I spent the pre-dawn hours creating a mirror of the company's server. I moved every single piece of my intellectual property, every script, every raw video file, every brand contact into an encrypted vault that only I could access. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, the Unspoken Journals company was nothing but an empty shell with Jack's name on the lease. He wanted the business, he could have the office chairs, and the unpaid utility bills. The soul of the machine was now sitting on a thumb drive in my pocket. Around 8 a.m., my phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was Sarah. She had moved past the scared phase and into the furious one. "Owen, I'm at the house with the police. They say you can't lock me out of my own home. Open this door right now, or we're breaking it down." I didn't panic. I had already called my lawyer at dawn, and he had reminded me of the emergency protective order we had filed based on the documented evidence of her and Jack's plan to have me committed. I walked to the window and looked down. There she was, standing on the sidewalk with 2 officers and a locksmith who looked incredibly uncomfortable. She looked different in the daylight, haggard, her expensive hair extensions tangled her face, a mask of desperation. I opened the window just enough for my voice to carry. "Officer, I have an active filing regarding a conspiracy to commit medical fraud and identity theft against me. Check the system for Owen and Sarah. I'm not opening the door for my own safety." The officers stopped. They looked at their tablets, then at each other. Sarah started screaming a high-pitched, jagged sound that made the neighbor's curtains twitch. "He's lying. He's having a breakdown. Look at him. He's paranoid." One of the officers looked up at me. "Sir, we need to verify some documents. But for now, ma'am, you need to step back from the property." Watching her face crumble as the police forced her to step away from the rights she had boasted about was better than any drug. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was a spectacle for the suburban joggers. I closed the window and went back to my office. I had work to do. The next move was the social surgery. I reached out to our biggest sponsor, a tech conglomerate that provided 40% of our annual revenue. I didn't tell them I was getting a divorce. I told them that an internal audit had revealed significant financial irregularities involving my partner, Jack, and that I was personally dissolving the partnership to protect their brand reputation. I attached just enough evidence of Jack's offshore account to make their legal team break out in a cold sweat. By noon, their contract with Jack was dead. By 1 p.m., they had signed a new exclusive deal with me under a new entity. I was dismantling Jack's world brick by brick, and he didn't even have the tools to stop me because he was too busy trying to manage Sarah's public meltdown. I knew they were together now, probably in some sterile hotel room, realizing that the crazy husband they tried to trap was actually the one holding the leash. I could almost hear their arguments. Jack would be blaming her for getting caught. She would be blaming him for not being legal enough. The love that thrives on betrayal always rots the moment the lights come on. By mid-afternoon, the house felt like a command center. I had 3 laptops running a pot of tea I'd actually managed to drink and a sense of calm that was almost frightening. I was waiting for the final piece of the puzzle. My private investigator, a man who worked in the shadows of the corporate world, finally called back. "Owen," he said, his voice sounding like gravel being crushed. "You were right about the consulting firm. It's a front for a high-interest predatory lending scheme. Jack's been using your company's credit rating to back loans for people who can't pay them back. It's not just unethical, it's a federal nightmare if the right people find out." "And who are the right people?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "The IRS, for starters, and a few of the investors who think they're putting money into digital media, not loan sharking." I felt a cold shiver of triumph. Jack hadn't just been stealing from me. He had been playing a much more dangerous game. He was a house of cards built on a windy pier. "Send me the files," I said. "All of them." As the documents began to flood my inbox, I realized I had the power to not just fire Jack, but to put him in a cage for a very long time. I looked at the photos, the I had sent Jack meeting with men in cheap suits at diners on the edge of town. And then there was one photo that made me stop breathing. It was Sarah. She was at one of those meetings. She wasn't just a passenger in Jack's betrayal. She was an active participant in the lending scheme. She was the one signing the notary lines on the predatory contracts. My Sarah. The woman who used to cry at animal rescue commercials was helping Jack rob desperate families of their homes. The pain I'd felt at 3 a.m., the heartbreak, was officially gone. It was replaced by a pure, incandescent rage that felt like liquid gold in my veins. They hadn't just betrayed our marriage. They had betrayed every value I thought we shared. They were monsters, and I was the one who had been feeding them. I spent the rest of the evening preparing the gift for the authorities. I organized every document, every photo, every recorded whisper into a sequence that left no room for interpretation. I felt like I was editing the most important video of my life. This wasn't for YouTube. This was for a grand jury. As night fell again, the house grew quiet, but it wasn't the lonely quiet of the night before. It was the quiet of a predator waiting in the tall grass. I stood in the kitchen eating a piece of dry toast, watching the shadows of the trees stretch across the backyard. I thought about the transformation the self-help gurus talk about. They usually mean finding peace or learning to paint. My transformation was different. I had become a version of myself that was capable of calculated cruelty. I checked my phone one last time before heading to bed. A final message from Sarah sent from a new number. Owen, Jack says we can fix this. He has a plan. Just meet us at the office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We'll sign over whatever you want. Just don't do anything stupid. We're still family, remember, family. The word felt like a slur. I didn't reply. I just set my alarm for 6 a.m. I had a very important delivery to make to the federal building downtown, and I wanted to be sure I was there before the doors even opened. I walked through the dark house, my footsteps echoing on the bare floors. I went into the guest room, the room where Sarah had been working on her laptop for months. I looked at the empty desk, the place where she had sat while plotting to erase me. I reached out and ran my hand over the surface, feeling the cool wood. Then I noticed something. A small blue post-it note stuck to the underside of the desk drawer. I peeled it off. It was in Sarah's handwriting, just a series of dates and a single word, done. The dates matched the times I had been away at speaking engagements or filming on location. Done, done, done. She hadn't been marking a calendar. She had been counting down the days until I was gone. I crumpled the note into a tiny ball and dropped it on the floor. I didn't feel the sting of it anymore. I just felt the weight of the thumb drive in my pocket, the heavy, silent power of the truth. I walked back to my own room, the master bedroom that no longer felt like a crime scene, and lay down on the bare mattress. I didn't need sheets. I didn't need a pillow. I just needed the morning to come. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the world outside, the distant sound of a siren, the wind rattling the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder what Sarah was doing. I didn't wonder where Jack was. I knew exactly where they were going. I felt my breathing slow down, my heart settling into a steady, rhythmic beat. I wasn't the victim of a dream anymore. I was the architect of a nightmare. I drifted into a shallow sleep, my mind already visualizing the look on Jack's face when he tried to log into his bank account the next morning and found nothing but a 0 and a freeze order. I woke up exactly 1 minute before my alarm went off. The room was gray, that thin pre-dawn light that makes everything look like a sketch. I stood up, stretched my aching back, and walked to the mirror. I looked at the man staring back at me. He looked older, tired, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there 48 hours ago. I splashed cold water on my face, dressed in my most professional suit, the one I wore for high-stakes meetings, and grabbed my briefcase. I walked out of the bedroom through the kitchen and toward the front door. I stopped at the foyer, my hand on the handle of the suitcase I'd packed for myself, not for a trip, but for the transition. I looked at the spot on the floor where Sarah had stood when I told her to leave. I could almost still hear the click of her heels. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of old coffee and cold resolve, and stepped out onto the porch. The world was quiet, the streetlight still humming a light mist clinging to the grass. I walked down the driveway, my shoes crunching on the gravel, and climbed into my car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the life I'd lost. I just put the car in gear and started the engine, the low growl of the motor, the only sound in the waking neighborhood. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw a familiar black Mercedes parked 3 houses down, tucked away in the shadows. I knew he was in there. I knew they were watching me, waiting to see what my next move was. I didn't speed up. I didn't wave. I just drove past them. My eyes fixed on the road ahead, a single cold thought echoing in my mind. It's 9 a.m. somewhere. And for Jack and Sarah, the clock is about to stop. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather smooth against my palms, and felt the first true rays of the sun hit the windshield, blinding me for a split second before the path ahead became perfectly clear. The glare of the sunrise against my windshield felt like a spotlight, exposing every crack in the life I had once called perfect. I didn't blink as I passed that black Mercedes. I didn't need to see Jack's face to know the panic that was beginning to set in. They were waiting for a negotiation that was never going to happen. They were prepared for a wounded husband who could be reasoned with or intimidated. They weren't prepared for a man who had already moved on to his next life. But before I tell you how the hammer finally fell, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest in the comments. If you found out your partner wasn't just cheating, but was actively trying to ruin your sanity to take your business, would you go for a clean break? Or would you make sure they felt every bit of the fire they started, drop a justice or revenge below? I'm reading every single one, because where I was headed, the line between the high was starting to disappear. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. This is how you take your power back. I arrived at the federal building 20 minutes before the doors opened. I sat on the cold stone steps, my briefcase resting on my knees. I watched the city wake up, commuters rushing past with their lattes, totally oblivious that I was about to dismantle 2 lives before their lunch break. I felt a strange, detached calm. It's that feeling right before a video goes viral, the quiet before the storm. The meeting with the assistant U.S. attorney was shorter than I expected. I didn't have to do much talking. I just opened the briefcase and laid out the Great Reckoning folder. I showed him the predatory loan contracts Sarah had notarized and the wire transfers Jack had disguised as business expenses. The attorney didn't say much at first. He just scrolled through the files with a grim focus. When he finally looked up, he adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Owen," he said, his voice flat but impressed. "You've done 6 months of our work in 48 hours. This changes everything." I left the building at 10:15 a.m. feeling lighter than I had in a decade. My phone was a graveyard of missed calls. Jack, Sarah, Jack again. I ignored them all until I reached a quiet park, sat on a bench, and finally listened to the last voicemail from Sarah. Owen, where are you? The locks are changed at the office. Jack's accounts are frozen. This isn't funny. Think about the years we had. I deleted it. I thought about the years we had. I thought about the man in the video laughing in my foyer. I thought about the word done written in her handwriting. The years weren't a foundation, they were a countdown. The final confrontation happened at 2 p.m. at my lawyer's office. I insisted on it. I wanted them to see me in a room where they had zero power. When I walked in, Jack looked like he had aged 10 years. His suit was wrinkled, his hair a mess. Sarah was next to him, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at me with this weird lingering hope as if she could still wife her way out of this. Owen, she started, her voice trembling. Please, we can fix the money. We don't have to involve the feds. We're still family, remember. I sat down and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the final divorce decree. It was scorched earth. I took the house. I took the company. I even took the dog because she only liked him for the Instagram aesthetic anyway. Jack slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. I built that brand with you. You built a parasite, Jack. I said, my voice quiet. I built the brand. And as for the feds, I spent my morning with them. They're probably at your apartment right now. The silence was absolute. I watched the blood leave Jack's face. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, I saw the truth of their love. It wasn't love. It was a mutual recognition of failure. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't comfort her. He just stood up and walked toward the door. You're a dead man, Owen, he hissed. No, Jack, I replied. I'm the only one in this room who's actually alive. He walked out, leaving Sarah alone. She reached out across the table, her fingers brushing the papers. Owen, I loved you. In the beginning, I really did. I know, I said. That's why this had to be so quiet. If I still hated you, I would have made a scene. But I don't feel anything for you anymore. You're just a task I had to finish. She signed the papers with a shaking hand and left without another word. I stayed in that office for a long time. My lawyer patted me on the shoulder. It's over, Owen. You won. I walked out into the late afternoon sun. I didn't go back to the house. I checked into a high-end hotel downtown, ordered a steak, and sat by the window. I opened my laptop and started a new script. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about a man who realized the sun was finally rising. So here's my question for you all as we close this chapter. Do you think I was too cold, or did Sarah and Jack get exactly what they deserved for trying to steal my life? Let's talk about it in the comments. I want to know your thoughts on second chances versus final endings. I'm Owen. And for the first time, I'm not waiting for anyone to wake up to start my day. Thanks for being part of my journey. Don't forget to like and share this if you've ever had to find the strength to walk away. I'll see you in the next one.